Intel have done it. They have made the impossible streaming scenario that I said you should stop bother chasing on previous generation CPUs possible. And I'm eating my own words, which is pretty crazy. The gameplay you were watching right now was streamed at 120 FPS on X264 slow. What? Let's talk about it. We just released Forerunner, our Halo-themed backing track album of music that you can use in your videos and streams. If you're unaware, I have a music service called Backing Track, which is royalty-free music that you can use in your streams, videos, podcasts, things like that. Free to use, free to download. You can check it out at backingtrack.gg. Free downloads are available on our Discord server at discord.gg/EposVox. And we just released 2 new albums over the past couple months. The first is Versus 2, which is the sequel to one of our most popular albums that we have released to date. And secondly, we have Forerunner, which is a Halo Infinite themed album that has some really awesome Halo vibes, some hard rock and metal going, and I've been using it for my Halo Infinite streams, and it is awesome. So if you're a fan of Halo or you like the kind of music we're putting out, go check out the new album. And if you've never heard of it before at all, now's your chance. Again, that's backingtrack.gg, where we have all the services that you can stream it from, and it's on pretty much everything at this point, and then discord.gg/EposVox for the downloads, stems, things like that. Happy streaming. I'm EposVox, the stream professor, and I've had my hands on the Intel Alder Lake 12th generation CPUs, the 12900K and the 12600K for a little while now. It was a bit of a paper launch, so getting my hands on supporting hardware, DDR5, Z690 motherboard, all of that was a little bit tough, so I didn't have a launch review ready, and you know how that goes. I ended up I was supposed to review the 11th gen, and I used it for some comparison videos and things like that, but I didn't do a formal video like this on it because I just kept running into so many issues, and then it got too far away from launch to really matter, and the summary for everyone else was just that it was worse than 10th gen. 12th gen offers something special, so I'm not gonna waste your time going through gaming benchmarks. A million videos on that already. You can check out performance, you probably already know it if you're interested in this. But we are checking out my test bench behind me featuring the 12900K today. And I want to give shout outs to Asus, who sent over their Z690E Wi-Fi from their ROG Strix line for the motherboard. Beautiful motherboard, has one of those cool heat sinks for the main NVMe, PCIe Gen 5 for the graphics card, which isn't needed yet. And then some Gen 4 and Gen 3 slots, DDR5 support, up to 5 NVMe drives if you use their expander card. Pretty wild stuff. Huge shout out to Corsair for sending over their DDR5 memory, because of course, new platform, new memory. I didn't have any memory going. This is their Vengeance DDR5. It is 2 sticks for 32 gigs at 5200 mega transfers per second. And then they also sent over their H150i Elite Capellix AIO liquid cooler. And then of course, shouts out to Noctua, who sent over the supporting hardware for their coolers that I have used. I will have links to everything linked below as well. Also, huge shout outs to Kingston for sending out their new Fury NVMe SSD that I use for my boot drive for my test bench here. Kingston Fury is back. As I am the stream professor, this video is mainly going to focus on streaming performance and content creation performance, which is very important to look at here, as I think Alder Lake has indirectly opened up a new world of streaming performance that as we scale this, especially if we ever get any HEDT, you know, high-end, big multi-core processor solutions, things are gonna get wild. So just first and foremost, the TLDR, I'm gonna try to make this video kind of brief and just talk about the big hitters here. The TLDR with the streaming performance is that X264 slow is now possible without any specific management. On some of the HEDT CPUs, that being Intel's X299, the 7980XE, 9980XE, 10980XE, and then Threadripper kind of 2000 and Threadripper 3000, you can mostly stream at 1080p 60 on X264 slow if you managed your core separation and affinity and all of that and tried to separate your game from your stream. The reason you would want to do this is some people feel that X264, which is the software-based encoder that runs on your CPU for live streaming, they feel that the encoder looks better at slow or slower or whatever for certain scenes or gameplay streams than NVENC or NVIDIA GPU encoding. Now at this point, especially on Turing and Ampere GPUs, NVENC video encoding, which runs on the graphics card, generally performs better than X264 ever will, and generally looks about the same. And I've been streaming a ton of Halo Infinite using just NVENC, and I get people in chat all the time asking how it looks so good, and literally I'm just streaming with NVENC. It's mostly on par with or beating X264 in a lot of scenarios. But that was under kind of the premise that X264 slow specifically isn't really built for real time. I've said this in dozens and dozens of videos that X264 slow and anything slower than that is not suitable for real time use because it's literally not designed for real time use. And that is still true. But as this keeps turning off the displays, despite me telling it not to for another hour in my power plan. But due to the magic that Alder Lake brings to the table, the 12th generation CPUs brings to the table, it's possible. So I'm still running through some extra games to just slap some games in here. My favorite thing when I make these videos is when I start having to invent new tests to put the hardware to the test, because my previous tests just no longer, was challenging enough, which is what happened here. I have usually a set cycle of games I run through and a set cycle of settings, and everything really kind of chokes on X264 slow, and I don't go past that or whatever. On this one, I started reaching to X264 slower. Now, I think placebo is still years off, but Intel 12th generation, or the 12900K specifically, runs X264 slower in terms of live real-time video encoding better than the 11900K runs X264 slow. The 11900K, every time I kicked it to slow, would choke really hard and you're dropping 50 to 90% of frames in most games. Whereas Alder Lake can run X264 slower, dropping 45% or lower. And in some cases, potentially reaching the point of being usable, just like needing just a little bit more performance and it could do it. Whereas in most games, X264 slow is actually doing pretty well. So then I decided to up the ante, and I was able to stream in 120 FPS in X264 slow in a couple games. It worked out in Halo Infinite, it worked out in Battlefield 2042, although that is technically cheating because the game itself isn't averaging 120 FPS. It worked in Rainbow Six Siege. Streaming is just not an issue on this CPU, which is kind of why I wanted to just make a shorter video focusing on this one, because I get asked a lot what the best CPU is for single PC streaming, and it doesn't matter if you're looking at the 5950X or the 11900 or 10900K previously. Without jumping to Threadripper or X299, it didn't seem reasonable to jump after these X264 modes. You can do it here now. X264 slow is attainable, and it barely, well, I'm not gonna say it barely breaks a sweat. It gets a little toasty, not too toasty compared to other Intel CPUs, but it's doable. And this is just blowing my mind right now, and I just wanted to share that with you because this is wild. Now, you may be asking yourself, okay, you've talked a lot, said a lot of nerdy stuff. How is this happening? This has to do with the new architecture with Intel 12th gen CPUs. This is called the Big Little design, I think, in which this processor, the 12900K, has 8 performance cores, and those performance cores have hyperthreading, so 8 cores, 16 threads, but then it has 8 efficiency cores, which run kind of more background tasks or lower priority tasks. And in theory with Windows 11, which is where all my testing has been, even literally the window that isn't in focus gets pushed off to the efficiency cores and things like that. We weren't sure how that was gonna work with streaming. I saw a lot of people had a lot of doubts that maybe X264 would take too much priority and whatever. And in the benchmarks I'm showing on screen, you can see how it impacts your game performance, because there is a hit to your game performance, but as long as you're like fine taking a little bit of a hit or you reduce your graphics settings, the new thread manager that interacts with Windows 11 with this CPU does a fantastic job of keeping X264 out of the way of your game, but still allowing it to run at the speed it needs to, which is phenomenal. And in theory, this is also made possible by the fact that there are 8 efficiency cores, because I've talked about this on a few times, but X264 only scales to a certain number of threads and cores before you start losing performance and quality and things like that, which isn't, there's no indicator of this, there's no message for this, but that's just how the math of how it divides it up works. If you want to go search through the Doom 9 forums for the explanation for yourself, you're welcome to. But you can't throw more threads at it after a certain point, and that point starts around 10 or so for 1080p. It has 8 threads and they can handle it. So I'm still a huge proponent of multi-PC streaming in terms of stability, in terms of still being able to manage your stream if your gaming computer crashes, your game crashes, something goes offline. You want the maximum like esports frame rate potential. And I did run into a couple quirks, although reinstalling like chipset drivers and USB drivers and things like that so far appears to have alleviated it because I haven't encountered it again. But I kept having an issue specifically in Halo Infinite on this test bench which by the way, I didn't test the frame rates for Halo Infinite like I did the other games because it is still in beta. The performance kind of weird, and it has an always on dynamic resolution scaler, so you're not getting any real performance data out of it. And if you just set the frame rates right, then you're running at a locked 120 anyway, or whatever you set your frame rate to. So it was worthless to track that data. But I was having a specific issue in Halo Infinite where all of my USB devices would disconnect. And this was a problem while I was streaming, because I mean, obviously while you're gaming, because it disconnected my mouse and keyboard, but while I was streaming, it also disconnected my audio devices. So suddenly everything disconnected and then reset, and suddenly all my audio was pumping out my monitor speakers. I couldn't control the game, and then my stream no longer had access to my audio either, and they wouldn't reconnect until I rebooted. So I had to take my entire stream offline after everyone's like, wait a minute, you froze, but your gameplay's still going, and I don't hear anything. What's happening? That kept happening a lot in Halo Infinite during my first rounds of testing, but like I said, refreshing the BIOS update, the USB updates, and everything like that seems to have maybe fixed it, but new platforms always mean new quirks, new PCIe generation means new USB issues for some reason, and there's been issues that I haven't run in until now with the NVIDIA Ampere GPUs, which I'm using the RTX 3080 on this test bench. Where it would cause USB disconnect issues. So it could have been any one of those things, but it seems to be going pretty good. And even Battlefield 2042 is handled pretty well here, given that the game still needs a little bit of optimization passes on it. So I'm blown away. I don't have access to AMD 5000 to test. I get asked about that a lot. If you want to send it, my PO box is linked below, but they don't send me CPUs sometimes, and I just gotta roll with that instead of making big videos about how they don't seed samples like a lot of channels do. I think in context, having talk to people who use AMD 5000 to stream and stuff, like it really is the architectural differences that are causing this to happen. And we are going to see the next generation in streaming kind of show up a little quicker than expected, because I'm still on the GPU encoding boat. I'm still on the boat that we're waiting for AV1 encoding to be more viable, to be more, usable. And then we're gonna see that take off for high res and high refresh rate streaming without needing a lot of bit rate. And that's gonna be huge. I have a lot of videos talking about that. I'll try to link them below. But I think in the meantime, we're gonna see a jump to some higher encode settings, higher frame rates, even if you wanna stream at 120 FPS with these processors. And that's incredibly exciting because that was truly unexpected. We've seen multiple generations now of CPUs now where we're realistically getting negligible gains in streaming performance. And that all hinged on what I described as X264 slow, not being real-time appropriate, and 120 FPS streaming being kind of hard to do at medium on most CPUs. And we're getting past that now. So wanted to share this with you because this is exciting. I also wanted to mention, when you're streaming, you also have access, if you enable the iGPU and you have a K or non-K model and not the KF model, you have QuickSync encoding, which out of all of my stream testing was the highest performing in terms of not impacting your game frame rate out of all the encoders I tested, including NVENC. It competes quite favorably in terms of quality as well. I ran my handbrake tests with H.265 and H.264 at 6 megabits per second, so we can compare to X264 and NVENC. And then in my OBS streaming test here, I do have an issue. It's really annoying. When I stream at 60 FPS and then remux the file, it just breaks the file with QuickSync. This has happened all the time. I'm gonna try to report it through the right channels to get that fixed, but 120 FPS works fine. And I was able to stream 120 FPS in quality mode with QuickSync video, and it looks somewhat comparably to X264, which is really exciting. So you have that would be the least headroom impact of encoding available to you. Then of course you have GPU encoding if you have an NVIDIA card. If you have AMD, I'm sorry, it's terrible still. And then you have X264, which just runs on those efficiency cores, and it's efficient. Then of course I ran the Puget Bench benchmarks for Resolve and Adobe Premiere Pro for video editing performance, and of course it surprisingly edits video like a champ as well. You're going to see a little bit more workflow potential in terms of doing multiple things at once while you're editing your video or rendering your video and then going and doing something else, which we haven't really had before. I have always liked my Threadripper system for that reason, because it just has enough resources and memory speed and all that to generally allow me to still do stuff while I render videos, but it's a little bit smoother on Alder Lake, I have to admit. And I think that's gonna integrate quite nicely with Windows 11's virtual desktops and task view, in that theoretically, the way it's supposed to work with the scheduler and stuff, in concept at least, is you can tell it to render on one desktop. I don't know why that keeps turning off my displays. Switching over to another desktop and having that kick the render to the background and still keep doing work. Wait for some Windows updates before you fully switch to Windows 11, but exciting potential are here, and I wanted to share this with you. I will probably have a second video coming on the 12600K. I wanted to go ahead and get this out before it got too late and it became pointless to cover it again, but the next generation of CPU encoding for live streaming is here, and I'm beyond excited. Hope you enjoyed this video. Product links will be in the description down below if you're interested in checking it out for yourself. I know getting a hold of any computer hardware at this point is kind of an effort in futility, so I'm not necessarily suggesting you need to go fight the bots and all of that, but if you're interested in keeping up with where things have been going, this has been it. Hope you enjoyed. Hit the like button, subscribe, join us on Discord, discord.gg/EposVox, and remember, be kind, rewind.